What are the residents of Kursk region and Tver region saying after the strikes on the ammunition depot? Because a lot of detonations were already known there. Experts, analysts, and Estonian intelligence report that this is for 2 to 3 months of war. There were shells there. But let's see first, by the way, you showed this video in your social networks, and I want to show it too, so that our viewers can see what the residents of the Kursk region are saying. Vladimir Vladimirovich, please take your troops away, withdraw our troops, and Ukraine will leave us alone. Leave their territory. Abbas, do they hear it, understand it, and will they react to such emotional statements of the residents of the Kursk region? Of course they do, Igor. That's the story. That is troubling the Kremlin. The Kremlin has already wavered on, so to speak, liberals, Democrats, and oppositionists. But this woman's opinion is obviously not opposition. It's from the very core people on whom the regime has always relied. This is the social base of the regime, and a change in the mood of these people is a very worrying bell. You can rule for a long time without paying attention to the opposition if you have, first of all, law enforcers, and secondly, some kind of social base. This woman is an example. If you lose your social base, you can't hold on to bayonets alone indefinitely. You will have to tighten the screws very hard. When you tighten the screws so much that you have to shut almost everyone up, the economy starts to suffer and it becomes impossible to live in poverty. It's like North Korea. At the same time, you risk losing the loyalty of the law enforcers. The peculiarity of Russian law enforcers is that they are a very corrupt corporation, used to living large and beautiful. They won't like living in poverty either. So this is exactly the kind of story that has always worried the Kremlin. This is exactly what the expensive propaganda machine is for. It would seem that if you have bayonets, why bother? But the Kremlin realizes that bayonets alone will not last long. Therefore, the opinion of these people is very important. I am not saying that everything will change tomorrow after this video appears, but it is a wake-up call for the Kremlin, demonstrating a dynamic that is clearly not in favor of the regime. People who yesterday were shouting, "Crimea is ours," are now disappointed and confused. They no longer want any victory, just as long as the war is over sooner. There is a difference in wishes in this situation. The Kremlin and Putin want to continue the war, and these people don't want war anymore. In this video, we saw the request, but I have another video, more of an invocation, that seems more disturbing to the Russian authorities. Let's hear it. We need to spell out what is needed to ensure the protection of the public. Why do people have to stand without fuel on the highway and cannot go anywhere? Why do they write on social networks to be evacuated because they are sitting in the basement of a house in a completely destroyed village? The people are waiting for this to happen in every region. Why are we silent? Kursk, Bryansk, Voronezh. Every region of Russia is about to be bombed. Is it working? Abbas, there is a much longer clip, and the woman is not alone, it says. But what I'm getting at is the consequences of when, on September 18th, it flew into the Tver region, Toropets, the settlements where I've already mentioned, the ammunition depots. That's how serious it is. because all military experts as one say that you have to wage war on enemy territory. But now there is enemy territory. This is the Kursk region, and these are flights to military facilities so that shells do not go to war in Ukraine. How dangerous is this situation? Because already here, this woman is not just pleading. She's saying, stand up, Bryansk, Kursk, and other regions. It is obvious that people first ask, and then, when their request is not granted, they become more and more angry. And then at some point, there is no grabbing the authorities by the throat. In fact, that's what happens. And there is no revolution. So here the population is loyal, and tomorrow it suddenly makes a revolution. There is always some intermediate stage when people, it's such a wave-like process. It's non-linear. When emotions are up and down, when some stable state is lost and there is what can be called perhaps just a popular word, shake. When people start to be shaken up, when today the mood goes up, because it seems that we are winning. Recently, we were going to capture Kharkiv at the beginning of summer. It seemed quite recently. We were advancing, we were going to take Ugledar. And suddenly everything changes dramatically, and already Kursk, which was defended, could not be repulsed. To organize a counter-offensive, then the Ukrainians organize a cauldron and surround it. That is, when people have hope, then despair, then hope again, then despair. They get out of balance. And this is exactly the situation we are witnessing now, and it is in fact a precursor to the revolution. When people are, so calm, stable, balanced, planning, not doing, people are generally in a psycho-emotional equilibrium in their normal state. They are anti-escalation, anti-unnecessary risks. Revolution is always about risks. That's why you can't take people in their psycho-emotional state to the streets, and they won't make any revolution. It is as a result of this long process that people get the feeling that things will not get worse. People stop thinking in rational categories. They live by emotions. Then, at some point, the emotion, I'm fed up, how much can we put up with, turns out to be the main driving force, i.e. the driver that determines not just mood, but behavior, when people move from words to deeds. What this woman is saying is exactly an example of a person who has been thrown off balance. It is not necessarily that this woman will make a revolution tomorrow. Perhaps now the situation on the front will somehow be more favorable for Putin, and she will return to a state of lesser equilibrium. But on average, the fact that she is now already out of balance is an indicator. Besides, the situation on the front is such that there is no reason to expect that Putin will suddenly start to get things right. They can't even knock the AFU out of Kursk, Obviously, it's such a sacred duty. What could be more important for a Russian patriot than to liberate his native land, which has fallen, so to speak, under the heel of the occupier? Yeah, they can't do that. Obviously, for this woman in a state of equilibrium, to calm down, that everything is fine, everything is going according to plan, we are winning, she can't hope to do that. Of course, I would like to recall that just recently it was the 2-year anniversary of the partial mobilization that Putin announced in the 22nd year. The wives of the mobilized gathered outside the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation in Moscow. And what's interesting is that you and I have even talked more than once about how Putin went into the so-called elections. Yes, and he tried to surround himself with people in military uniform. Now, he promised that the elite should be changed, that the elite should include people who were in the war. But here were these women who asked to bring their relatives and husbands back from the war. They were taken into autozaks. How much does this affect the situation? We see that it is one thing to say and another to do. Deeds and words are at odds. Yes, of course, this does not fit with the image of national cohesion that the Kremlin is trying to paint around the president and the goals of the NWO, when the people are united and the president cares about his people. Right now, people can clearly see that the president doesn't care about anyone at all, and he doesn't care about anyone and is not interested in anyone. If he doesn't care about you, it means that he only needs you as cannon fodder, as in the case of these mobilized people. Let me restate. They need the people only as cannon fodder. And in order to force people to be this cannon fodder, they are ready to crush and press them, including with the help of law enforcers. This is quite obvious. It is blatant arbitrariness when the wives of mobilized people who are not making a revolution, not calling for the overthrow of Putin, and not screaming in the cold are taken to the detention centers. They come to the Ministry of Defense, seeking a meeting with the minister to discuss when their husbands will return. These men, who had peaceful professions, were unexpectedly sent to fight overseas, not defending their hometowns, but taking over someone else's land. President, do you see the problem? These women have every right to be outraged because a domestic war, where enemies burn their homes, and a colonial war for territory are not the same. When the NWO started, Putin had the upper hand, claiming that if we didn't attack first, we would be attacked. While it may appear to be a colonial war since we are fighting on their territory, fundamentally it is a defensive war. We are waging a defensive war on their territory, just so that we don't have to fight on our own. Well, at least there is some logic in that. And now Putin is officially saying that the goals of the war are the liberation of Donbass. It's these give it back here, when he defines an ultimatum to the Ukrainians. That was 2 months ago. Yes, he said it himself, not someone who made it up. Not on some agent slandering. He himself says that these 4 regions give them to us. Yes, they withdraw from these territories, these regions are given to us, and after that, we, so to speak, start negotiations. That is, he is already officially waging a war for the possession of other people's territories. In essence, in form, it is already a colonial war, imperialist in essence. And women are rightly outraged. When political leadership decides to seize additional territories by sending a professional army of contractors who chose that path, it can be understood. However, when people are taken from their peaceful lives not to defend their homes but to capture new lands, that is outrageous. Russia can certainly live without the Donetsk region, Luhansk region, Kherson, or Mykolaiv, which Putin claims and it managed fine without Crimea as well. We are not discussing a threat to the state's existence. General mobilization is a mechanism for waging a defensive war when the enemy attacks and threatens the state. It is not a tool for colonial warfare to seize new territories, especially since Russia does not lack territory. and they are packed up and accused of extremism, pushed into autozaks, and taken to a detention center, where they are treated like criminals. So these are ordinary citizens with perfectly just demands. They are wives, after all, of husbands who are now shedding blood for you. It would seem that you should talk to them respectfully, at least out of respect, even if you don't respect your citizens. Well, out of respect for those people who are shedding blood for you there, none of this is happening. That is, there is no respect. Of course, everyone is outraged. So it's that rare situation when both liberals and oppositionists speak with one voice. And Navalny's headquarters are there, for example. His team is outraged, and the war correspondents, the patriots who are in favor of the war, are also outraged by this. In fact, of course, the authorities are acting like an elephant in a china shop. They actually contribute to this through their inability to organize a normal dialogue and political process with respect for the counterpart without attacks. They work against themselves. That is, they literally turn everyone against themselves. It is understandable that formerly apolitical women and liberals and pro-ethnic activists are also turned against themselves. The authorities, of course, as I said about this woman earlier, when they get sick, the authorities also get knocked out of their rut. They act in a suboptimal way, and they are already in such a semi-hysterical state, acting inadequately. I would, of course, like to ask you about mobilization, because everything is going to the point where a lot of sources are saying that Putin cannot do without it, because the people they are offering to contract are still not enough for the war on more than 1,300 kilometers of front. It is clear that with such losses, no one is counting. And what will this mobilization look like? And of course, if they understood what it would look like and what consequences it would lead to, they would organize it. But obviously, they are not sure how it will play out and how it will look. So they're holding off for now. But at some point, I think they will still organize it, because they probably don't have unlimited resources just by using money to recruit people. And of course, if they understood what it would look like and what consequences it would lead to, they would organize it. But obviously, they are not sure how it will play out and how it will look. So they're holding off for now. But at some point, I think they will still organize it, because they probably don't have unlimited resources just by using money to recruit people. In other words, the payments have to be constantly increased, and there are still not enough people. Again, we are judging this at least because their borders are, to put it mildly, not secure. Therefore, they cannot simultaneously attack in Donbass and knock the AFU out of Kursk region. And that's why I think that at some point they will still be forced to go for this mobilization, because with all the risks, it is still less than the risks, as I think, of Putin. He believes that this carries less risk than simply ending the war without achieving any results that can be sold to the Russian population as a victory. That is, choosing between fighting with mobilization or without mobilization, they choose to fight without mobilization. But when the choice comes up, either we end the war with some result that can be sold as a victory, or we end the war without any result. They will prefer the first option. So they're deciding that, God forbid, let's try mobilization after all. So I think it will come to mobilization after all. I would also like to quote a former Prime Minister of Russia 20 years ago, Mikhail, who left Russia in June of the 22nd year. He says the following about Putin. He realizes that not today, but in the near future, there will be a catastrophe. So he very much wants negotiations, because he is looking for behind-the-scenes signals for some kind of compromise.
Вот насколько вы считаете, Аббас, что реально Путин понимает ситуацию всю, потому что вот есть уже...
To what extent do you think it's realistic that Putin understands the overall situation? Because there is already a budget for the 25th year, where 40% goes to war. Education, medicine, and other areas are also being cut. We realize that the sanctions are taking a heavy toll, to put it mildly, on Russia's economy. To what extent does Putin realize that the economy is simply collapsing, or does he not realize it? And if he realizes how indifferent he is to what will happen to the country, I think he understands it's impossible not to realize it. It is an objective thing. But I think he understands it in a softened way. It's being presented to him. You know how? That is, any of those who explain to him what is happening in the economy, whether it is the Prime Minister, the First Deputy Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of macroeconomics, Novak, Nabiulina, or Oreshkin, any number of people in charge of the economy, from time to time, report to him their vision of what is happening. And every time, of course, they try to present what is happening in the economy as a consequence of Putin's own mistakes. You know? So they come up with some other reasons. Nabiulina is nodding at each other, among other things, pointing at the government for not doing enough. The government, in turn, nods at the central bank, and so on. But collectively, each of them is trying to, it's scary for them. If you say something that Putin takes as confirmation that you think he's to blame, that's the worst thing that can happen to you. It's the worst thing that can happen to you. And so each one of them very much softens and distorts the picture of the causes. That is, they paint him an honest picture of the problems with the economy, of course, but they try to distort the reasons that led to it. Therefore, I think Putin's cause and effect relationship is highly distorted. He sincerely considers everyone around him to be the cause of all the problems except himself. Although, strictly speaking, he is the cause. All other causes are secondary to him. And in his head, you see, it's a complicated story. He sees problems, and you can't miss them, when there is not enough money, when you have to reduce investments in all areas, including such important areas as infrastructure, for example. That is, he has problems. And Deputy Prime Minister Kusnelin, who oversees construction and housing and utilities, comes out and says that the housing and utilities sector is terribly underfunded. And this is a serious problem that will get worse in the future. We have 70 or 80% wear and tear on our utility networks and infrastructure, and with underfunding, it will only get worse every year. He says this publicly. Do you think he hasn't told Putin this? Putin knows there isn't enough money, but the reasons for this shortfall are another matter, with everyone blamed except him. Yes, so the situation will continue to get worse and worse. Thank you for this conversation. Just a question. At what stage of escalation will the problem start to show some results? Thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you for taking the time. I remind our viewers, Abbas Galyamov, political technologist, was with you. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share our conversation. My name is Igor Gavryshak, and I will see you on the air of Channel 24.